Welcome to Chandwell. My name's Michael, and as well as building this model of a run-down West Yorkshire town set in 1993, I'm also making this N-scale model of Bradford Cathedral, set right here in Bradford City of Culture Year 2025. I've been working on this model for about 7 months, and I thought it was about time that I took pause to show you where I've got up to. So in this video, I'm going to show you some of the interesting parts of this part of the model, some of the challenges I've faced, and some of the mistakes I've made. So join me then for this look at the halfway point of the Bradford 2025 model. At the end of my last video, I'd added the Sanctus Tower, and since then I've added a further 6 sections. Here on the south side, we have the Victorian and 1960s sections of the South Ambulatory and the interesting quarter-round southeast corner. Over on the north side, there is the North Ambulatory and the angled walls of the Chapel of the Holy Spirit. So let's take a look around the model then, and I'll show you some of the interesting challenges that I had when putting it together. The biggest challenge when drawing the cathedral's plans was working out which pieces overlap which. It's especially true for the 20th century extension that each of the sections of building overlaps its neighbours somehow. I had to really pay attention when drawing the plans to get this as right as possible before I made a single piece. With that done, I could build outwards from the lantern tower in such a way that each piece overlapped its neighbour just right. Here on the south, the overlaps show as the way the roof here overlaps the wall to the side, and where the cylindrical southeast corner envelops the Sanctus Tower. I particularly like how the roof here lines up with the tower. Doesn't that look lovely? Round on the north, we have a stepping down of sections, each one slightly overlapping its neighbour. I had originally drawn the Chapel of the Holy Spirit inset from its neighbour, but I later realised that it was all on the same level. I should have made this wall in one section, but I'll now forever have this visible join that I'll just have to learn to live with. The cylindrical southeast corner was interesting. I realised that it's actually a quarter circle with a straight edge joining it to the main building, but the 3 windows are central to the curved bit. I drew it all out using the free application Inkscape, and I used its measure path function to get the exact measurement of the card that I needed. 35.22mm plus 5.99mm is 40.81mm. This was just drawn out in my usual way, printed to sticky label and then cut out from 0.5mm grey board. I peeled the label off after cutting and then gently bent the part around a rolling pin and held it in place with elastic bands. I gave it a fine spray of water to dampen it down a bit, as this may, or may not, depending on who you listen to, help introduce a curve to the card. I printed some supporting pieces, which I glued to 1mm grey board. This stack here represents the straight part of the wall that I talked about earlier. And these bits will make up the frame of the tower. Like that. With the frame glued together, I attached the straight bit of wall and let the glue set, with it clamped into place. The elastic bands came off the rolling pin, and the piece of card maintained its curve. I decided to add glue to only one edge of the piece of card, and then glued the frame to this. I left it for an hour to fully set. With that edge firmly fixed, the frontage just wraps nicely around without coming undone. I used plenty of PVA glue, wrapped the front into place, and then used clamps to hold it all together. I added some elastic bands for good measure. I'd need to get in to add the windows later, so I cut away part of the frame once the glue had dried. I painted the visible edges of the card and the cover layer with stone-coloured paint. Then I just dropped the cover layer onto the face of the tower. I added backing pieces to the window to introduce depth. Although with hindsight these windows do look far too recessed, so I wish I hadn't done this. With the windows in place, the tower stuck onto the main model with PVA. I used techniques that I'd learned on the curved Earl Chanfield Hotel to build a frame and surface for the curved roof. And I'll link to that video that explains that at the end of this one. It comes out as only as far as the Sanctus Tower and has a flat part too. This involved drawing a few concentric circles and doing a bit of maths. With that done, it just glued onto the frame, and then could be plonked into position on the model. There are a lot of windows on the model. Each one has stonework tracery, and there are many different kinds, but I use the same technique for each one. I draw them in Inkscape, and then use various techniques to build the frames up into 3 layers, which are eventually printed onto thin card. The tracery on each layer gets progressively more narrow. A typical upright part is 1.2mm wide on the bottom layer and 0.4mm wide on the top. I find that 0.4mm is about as narrow as I can cut by hand without tearing the card. This part of the South Ambulatory was added in the 1800s, so it's not as old as the nave, but not as modern as the extension. I decided to use the same texture as the nave, even though it's not quite like the prototype. This little buttress took a week to make, which was longer than the rest of this section in its entirety, simply because it was so small and fiddly. I think the Lego man really shows the size of this little bit quite nicely. If you remember from my video a few months ago, the architect of the 1960s extension, Sir Edward Morph, wanted to respect traditional church architecture and build the extension on a slant to the main nave. As a result, the whole modern extension is at an angle of 1.5 degrees to the nave, in what is known as a weeping chancel. I wasn't sure when I started whether this would be visible on the model or not, but when looked at from above, it is definitely noticeable. Just like the real thing in Bradford, it's not easy to spot, but once you notice it, you really can appreciate it. Chandwell is known for its hundreds of terrible chimney pots made from crudely cut pieces of cocktail stick. There's one chimney on the cathedral model, here on the south side ambulatory. The real thing has a stainless steel top. As usual, I cut a bit of cocktail stick, but I took more care than normal to cut it straight, and I painted this one silver instead of terracotta. I just love the way that the Chapel of the Holy Spirit adjoins the Lady Chapel. This parapet sill returns and abuts the wall in just the right way to allow the roof to fit in nicely in a natural way. I'd looked at this part of the building over and over, and I really had to think hard to properly understand what was going on. I started by drawing the three sides so that they had equal lengths, 15.36mm in this case. I then added the parapet and moved the whole shape down until it was in the right position. I drew the chair store in such a way so that the visible parts of the wall were equal on both sides, 15.11mm. This meant that I could then get the windows central on the wall. I'm incredibly pleased with how the model is looking, and I'm very proud of what it looks like so far. That doesn't stop me though from noticing the little mistakes, the little oversights, the things that I wish I'd done a little bit differently. The things that admittedly probably only I will ever notice, but the things that are there anyway. I think it's probably worthwhile pointing some of those out. The crenellations are the wrong proportion on the nave. I forgot to add the lintels over these windows. The windows of the lantern tower are far too recessed, something I fixed on the later components. A badly drawn initial plan has caused the nave roof to be too high, and therefore too close to this window. I got the east and the west parts of the tower on backwards, so this off-centre opening is on the wrong side compared to the centre-oriented one on the other side. In my haste, I forgot to print the Bradford Cathedral sign onto the texture around here, and I don't think I can now add it without messing up the face. I really didn't do a great job where the lantern tower meets the nave. I should have made the lantern tower first instead of trying to retrofit its buttresses onto the nave. I've already mentioned this join line. I think as model makers we always notice our little mistakes. There's always those things that maybe only ever we see. But I really do think that those little mistakes are learning opportunities, like how I adjusted how I did the recessed windows as I went, and how I think I'll adjust the crenellations as well when I put the next crenellated parts on. These things will probably only ever be noticed by us and people won't see it once it's in the bigger scale of the model, but without making these mistakes there's nothing to learn from, and it really does mean we're not improving, so I'm happy with them. What's next? I think I'll finish off the southern side of the extension next. That's the sacristy, St Aidan's Chapel and the chair store. I'll start with the chair store I think, because the other two parts will fit nicely onto that. So I'm due to unveil the model at the cathedral in September. The clock is ticking, I'm only halfway there, but I must say I'm really enjoying making this model. I'm loving every minute of it. And I hope that you're enjoying it as well as I share with it on my videos. We're going to look at the completion of the south side of the extension next time. So until then, thank you for watching this video, take care, and I'll see you then.